Dear Mark, I am looking to introduce rock salt into my fishing, and I believe you are the guy to talk to. I have already done some research, but I am finding it all very confusing. I really don't know where to start. I hope you can help. Thanks.
Another question about rock salt. I think it's time for another film about pre-spawning carp.
Explode me, give it all to me, give it all to me. Explode me, give it all to me, give it all to me. Give it all to me, give it all.
Right, you've all seen the messages that I get. I get them continuously about a talk that I did many years ago about pre-spawning and post-spawning carp. If we think back to that talk, you'll remember that it caused a little bit of a stir because people had not been used to trying to think of carp as two different animals. Of course, this is my theory and it will only ever be my opinions and my theories, but without boring you rigid, boys and girls, it's based upon catching fish and catching them over a long period of time. So what I'll tell you in the next 10 or 15 minutes will not necessarily be something that is written in tablets of stone, but it's written in the 44 years that Mark Holmes has been carp fishing. So if there's any mistakes in there, any things you don't agree with, any inaccuracies, then just take it as my opinion, because that's all it can ever be. But that opinion seems to be constantly something that pricks people into sending me messages, and I try to be helpful, I try to get back to people and explain it, but people still get it wrong. So let's cover initially, in this first film, let's cover the pre-spawning carp. Well, if you remember when I spoke about it originally, I said that when carp come out of their winter slumber, you have literally a small window when before they spawn, they are looking for things that supplement their metabolism. And that's a fancy way of saying they're not looking for something that they want, they're looking for something that they need. And one thing that undoubtedly people now are starting to realise is that carp are very much creatures of habit. It differs from water to water, but the one thing that is underlying is that we're talking about a fish that's a saline vessel. So if you cut a carp in half and the liquid comes out, it's saline. So you taste that and you go, well, how can that be? How can it be that we've got a freshwater fish that is inherently saltwater? Well, if you think realistically about it, it is something that can also indicate that these things can and do live in different water conditions. So the freshwater systems that have grown up in the UK don't have any resemblance to the brackish waters in the east of Europe where these carp live also. So because they can live on such a wide variety of waters, it shows you that they have certain mechanisms in them that allow them to survive, and they are creatures of survival. You've got enormous pits in the Midlands and trout reservoirs where these things grow and grow very large, but equally we had a little place in Hereford that grew the record carp in the 50s, and that was left to its own devices, silty, shallow. So they can and they will survive on various conditions. But what you've got to try and understand is that when they come out of this winter slumber rather, they're looking for salt. And they're looking for salt because their saline levels, very much like an animal that goes into semi-hibernation, draws off its fat reserves during the winter. So you get things like bears and various mammals that hibernate. As soon as they come out, they are ravenous. Well, they're ravenous mammals because they need to build up the fat deposits. Well, what carp need to do is build up the saline deposits. So they go looking for minerals. And I learnt this a long time ago. And so what I have to try and do in my fishing, and what is the point I'm trying to get across to people, is if we can give them that mineral supplement and then wean them onto our carp baits at the same time, as I'll show you, then that makes the actual art of catching them an awful lot easier. So let's talk about rock salt. Right then, that is a slab of rock salt. Well, if I purposely wanted to show you that, so to highlight what people's conception is of rock salt, so we can see that quite clearly. Yeah, trust me, taste for vision, that's rock salt. So we'll keep that there. Now, what have we got? We have got various versions up and down the high street in various places, and if I show you this, you can see quite clearly the three different colours. Well, that's a visual thing, and that visual thing does not necessarily tell you what the salt and the saline is within each particular make. So let's look at this first. That's a version of an Himalayan type of rock salt. I see a lot of people advertising pink Himalayan rock salt, and that has a very high salt content. Then you've got what I call an halfway house, and this is rock salt which has been mined but has come from a seam where it's a clear salt. That is the Holy Grail, because within that is also a mineral. Well, I've let the cat out of the bag a few times at shows I've done, but if you can find a salt that's also got a potash content in it, that's something that is really the Holy Grail for it. So we're looking at three different types. They are not anywhere, shape or form like the various salts you will see in Tesco's. So when I see lads sending me pictures of rock salt of course in Tesco's, it's not really the stuff you could be using. It's better than nothing, but if you think about it realistically, that is gleaming white because they bleach it, and they bleach it because your mum and your grandma and your sister and people out in fishing don't want to put that on the fish and chips. They'd rather put something that's very white on the fish and chips, so it's bleached. So if you can possibly get this. Now, people say to me, also be careful when you put rock salt down, because one thing that salt does very quickly is it draws in moisture, the osmosis principle. Without sounding like your biology teacher, you know, the drawing in of moisture from the surroundings. Salt is absolutely brilliant for that, and I'm going to show you a little thing that happened yesterday before we did this little sequence, which actually proves it even more. So I'll put them down for now. When you've actually got your rock salt, what you have to try and do is you have to try and realise that it is probably a 6-week programme, 4 to 6 week programme of what you want to do with that. Now, the first thing is you've got to understand that 5 of those 6 weeks are non-fishing. Now, it's a busy world. I'm very fortunate, but there was a time when I wasn't fortunate and time was priceless to me. So people say to me, well, Holmesy, I can't waste 5 weeks going to a lake and not fishing. Well, what to do there is to actually prime a spot but not fish on it. So when I talk about 5 weeks of not fishing, what I'm basically saying is 5 weeks of pre-baiting a spot. Now, a few things to say there. Number one, you have to make sure that you are putting it on the right type of lake bed. What do I mean by that? If you use it on something that's already been worked, like gravel or a depression in the lake, that is absolutely perfect. What I mean by that is that if you're looking for a bare system, so if you can put some rock salt in and it's visible and it's leaking immediately, that is brilliant. Then you've got what I call the areas that aren't as attractive. And obviously mud and silt, where you put the rock salt in and it sinks, is not going to give you the immediate result that you would want, because what would happen is, yes, the leakage will be there and carp will eventually work it, but it takes longer. And you want to be getting these fish to a spot as quickly as possible. The third one, which is a complete no-no, is weed. Anything that actually goes in the weed, what you will find it will do is it will kill the weed. So if you're in, say, something like Canadian pondweed, which doesn't have a rooted system that's very hard in the ground, it will actually break away and start to break down the weed, and the fish, that doesn't respond as quick. So, to recap, look for a part of the lake that's got a hard bottom. Also, what I would do, because you don't want to believe everything that anybody tells you, I've always said, any corporate angler, any famous angler, any angler in the media, everything he tells you, question. Now, don't question it to him, because he might give you an answer that is relative to his water, not your water. Question everything in your own mind and make sure that you practice it and work it for your own water. So what I say to people when they say, what about this, what about that, what about that? I point them in the right direction, but say you can only know from your own water the angling pressure, the water depth, the pH level, the type of lake bottom. All those things are imponderables to me that I can't answer. So this is why there's no definitive answer for this. You have to do it yourself. One other point that's very important, which I keep getting asked all the time, is Holmesy. Where can I buy that? Well, it's good and bad news, lads. The bad news is you can't, unless you're a farmer and you can buy a ton at a time. Cheap as chips, mind, but where are you going to store a ton of rock salt in a 3-bedroom terrace with 3 kids? You're going to struggle. However, a halfway house, as I say, is if you go to tack rooms or horse places or animal feed shops, you will find that they have salt licks, and they come in various forms. They'll come in a block, or they'll come on a fancy rope for a horse. They will do the job. They're not as good as rock salt, but they will do the job for this purpose. Now, the important thing which you've got to remember, and I've always said this to people misconstrued a lot of what I've said. Initially, these fish are not feeding on the salt. So it's not something that is a bait additive. It's not a bait additive. What it is, it's just a standalone situation that allows you to introduce them to your bait very quickly. Because if you remember my early thoughts, I told you that if you use that, you will never need a marker float, and you will never need to spom things out bait wise, because they will come to the spot. And that's important in a day when there's a lot of bankside activity and you can't move on to fish. So you can go to a tack room and you can buy the stuff there. Now then, how to introduce it. This is the important part. We live in a world where waters are pressured. If you can imagine, if I turn up on a pre-baiting session and start lumping in rocks this size, and some poor get on the other bank is fishing quietly in the margins, you're going to have a problem. So what I would suggest is you are very, very considerate of other anglers. And also, more importantly, you need to be very, very secretive about this, because once you catch a few fish, people are cotton onto it. So very much like pre-baiting, be smart with this. Don't just do it and spoil everybody else's fishing and get yourself in trouble with the other members. Just be canny and just be clever. And if you think about it realistically, you can quite easily put that into a spom. Those you can spom out. Those you can't spom out. However, here's one for you. That dissipates in the water far quicker than that. And that's simply because when fish come to the spot, they will move about with the action and the big fish that come in. And remember, big fish want more saline than small fish. When big fish come in and they start ingesting the salt that's that size, they can move it about. As they move it about, it dissolves quicker. And so it really needs something that's quite large. So if you can get a boat and lower a big piece of rock salt in, that's what I would do. Now here's a really important thing. Pen and pencils at the ready. I would fish it short, and I would fish it short so that you've got a visual factor. Very quickly you can see in 4 and 5 foot of depth and less movement by fish. So that tells you that fish are coming to the spot. Now here's the important thing. What I would do in a time frame is I would actually put it in, say, a weekend. So I would go just rock salt. Then I would put it in midweek, just rock salt. Then I would put it in at the weekend, just rock salt. Then I would put it in midweek, just rock salt. Then you get into the third week. Now the third week, what I would do is I would put 3 parts rock salt, 1 part boilie. Midweek, 3 parts rock salt, 1 part boilie. Then the 4th week, 50-50. So 50% boilies, 50% salt. Then on the 6th week, I would go 75% bait, 25% salt, 75% bait, 25% salt. And then you fish a cured bait. Now here's the important thing. You might say to me, well, do I use cured baits when I'm putting in with rock salt? No, not at all. Remember what I said, the important part is to understand that these fish come to this mineral in order to give them a supplement that their body needs. The reason for introducing the bait and weaning them onto the bait is that as their salt levels increase, their need for more salt gets less and less. Once they've come to the spot and come for saline and there's some bait there, very quickly you'll move them from salt onto bait, and that's the important thing. Now what you've got to understand about what you would then do when you finish your prep with salt, you would fish a cured hook bait. Now here we go, this is important for you to see. These are cured hook baits, and you can see quite clearly how cured they are. If I put one of them in my mouth, oh, incredible. Now they're cured, and the thing about curing, the curing action is you want salt from the middle of the boiler to the outside, and you do that by freezing the bait and then putting the frozen bait that's blistered, put it in a thing called saltpeter, and you cover it up. And I would say really what you need to do is air dry the baits before you freeze them, so you get as much moisture out of the baits as you can. That might take about a week. Then you freeze your air dried baits for about another week, and what happens then is that gets really frozen. You've then put it in the saltpeter, and because there's no moisture in the dehydrated baits except the freezing effect, when it starts to thaw out, the salt works its way to the middle of the bait, and the absorption goes from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that's very important, because when you come to actually fishing the bait, and I don't know if James can zoom in on that, that is what you're looking for. You're looking for a tied on bait, and the reason for that is very simple. I've just shown the camera the cured baits that I use. If I was to drive a boiling needle, that it becomes very hard, and you can see it's nearly split the bait, and that process of putting a hole in the centre of the bait creates another area for the water to come in straight away. And what that basically means that when it's in the pond, it breaks down into a paste, into a mush, far quicker than if you tie it on. So the important part is to tie it on. People have a problem with tying it on. They think, oh, it's going to come off and all the rest of it. Let me tell you, it won't, because when that goes in the pond, because it's a cured bait, it will start to swell anyway. So the floss that you've put on the outside will bind into the bait, and you're not casting it out too far. If you've done this correctly, you should get a bite quickly. Now, one final aspect that I want to speak about in relation to using rock salt is that people misunderstood, as I said earlier, a lot of what I spoke about. They didn't quite understand that I was not talking about something that's a bait additive. I was talking about a mineral supplement that carp need. However, having said all of that, when you've weaned them onto your bait, there is undoubtedly an attractiveness of salt that they do like before they spawn. Once they're spawned, put it all in the garage for next year. But the point is this: certain baits denature, and that's not salt, that's mould. So if James can look on that, you can see quite clearly that that's a bait that in essence has gone off, and they start to denature. That means the attractive properties of that bait starts to wane, and if you're not careful, they can become toxic. Now then, rock salt is also an incredible preservative, and people have not latched onto this idea. Just by simply putting rock salt with your bait, you will preserve it, and it's a natural preservative. And people will say to me, well, is that not a cured bait, Holmes? It's not a cured bait. What it is, it's a natural preservative. There is no resemblance between that and that, but that's preserved and that's cured. So it's double-edged as to how you can use this. That is a bait that's not cured, and if it's not a shelf life, you've got maybe 3-4 days. You go to France and you've no freezer facilities, all you've got to do is just put rock salt in your baits. And here's one final thing that I'll leave you with, which is important, because again it shows the usefulness of this product as a supplement for your fishing. If I open this bucket up, get my hand in there, look at that goodness there, absolutely incredible. Now that is a liquid, a meat liquid, that would normally have a shelf life of about 3 to 4 days before it starts going off. With the inclusion of a few lumps of rock salt, that is preserved. So you can see quite clearly that your rock salt is not just simply a mineral supplement for the carp, it's also a very, very handy use, it's a handy tool to have in relation to when and how you fish it. Right, so as I said, there's one last little thing that I'd like to show you, and this is a sort of halfway house where you've not had the time to do your own cured baits, you've done the pre-baiting, and you're thinking to yourself, crikey, I've left my cured baits at home, I've not had time, they're not cured as well as I want, how can I still get fish to come into my cured baits? Simple. Tiny little bag of rock salt, something like a piece of rock salt, ground down it with a lump hammer. You can make a little parcel of rock salt. Fished on a bag, cast out, down it goes, little area of rock salt baiting, probably the best halfway house. Those small tiny bags, very inobtrusive. You could make them bigger, but there's no need, because what you're trying to do is replicate a cured bait. And if you think what your cured bait is doing, your cured bait is giving attraction, leaking off the salt, so it's the perfect blend of both principles that you've been doing. You've been baiting uncured boilies and you've been baiting salt, so cured boilie is literally something that'll get a bite quickly. That is the halfway house between a conventional boilie and your rock salt. So to recap, don't be scared of using rock salt. Don't listen to the nonsense about you cause irreparable damage to the ecosystem. You won't, because we're talking about a very small window of about 5 to 6 weeks. As we're actually filming this, it's the first few days of April. It's freezing cold temperatures. These fish have literally got 8 to 10 weeks to get themselves sorted ready for spawning. You imagine, you've put in the salt principle, you're talking about a time during the year of about 4 to 5 weeks when this is optimum. But if you do it correctly, you'll be amazed at the results. That is more or less a quick summary of how to use rock salt. There are other variations which people can PM me and all the rest of it. And what I'd like to do is that all the questions that I get from people over the course of the year, people are also looking not just at bait and not just at rock salt, they're looking at my thoughts in relation to post-spawning carp. Now, post-spawning carp, here's the bad news, boys and girls, are far more difficult to catch than pre-spawning carp. But here's the good news, I'll be doing a little film about my thoughts and applications on how to catch post-spawning carp. So thank you very much for listening to me.